Time with Stephanie Storey.
I am Stephanie Storey. Welcome to my show, Story Time. This is where I get to talk to other writers about their passions and their process. My guest today, very excited about, because she's not only a fiction writer and a playwright and an author, but she's also an editor. And you know how I love to geek out about craft and story and how we all do this thing called writing. So I am so looking forward to this conversation today. One of her previous books is called Get Published in Literary Magazines. If you were looking for that, that's great. But her latest, out just this fall, is called 7 Drafts. Self-edit like a pro, from blank page to book. Oh, an editing book. You have no idea how much I actually love the editing process. It's my favorite part because you have all the stuff to work with. Can't wait to talk to you. Welcome to the show, Allison K. Williams.
Thank you, Stephanie. It is fantastic to be here.
I really honestly geek out about the revision process.
I got to tell you, Stephanie, one of the favorite days of my life ever was when I realized what makes a run-on sentence a run-on and not just a really long sentence, because I love writing really long sentences. And when I was in grad school, my fellow grad students would like randomly throw periods in. And it's like, dude, that's meant to be a really long sentence. I want it to be a really long sentence. And I realized that what makes a sentence a run-on is when there's too many prepositional phrases in it, because prepositional phrases locate us in time and space. You know, on the computer, at the desk, in the room. Each time the reader's brain has to go to a new time or place or mental state. And if you have too many prepositional phrases, particularly if they're in a row, the reader can't follow it because it's taking them to new locations.
I've already learned something here today.
Isn't it great to know that?
So great. How did I think I had like an instinct that that's what it is when it gets confusing. Because sometimes I love a really long sentence, particularly in the middle of action. Somebody's doing something and it's like the train's rolling and it just won't stop. I love them. But that's great. You really are a geek about editing and how sentences work.
I so am. I love words. I absolutely love words. I have like 4 pages where I talk about why a semicolon is a different emotional moment than a colon. But I also promise you the book is also full of just really straight up, kind of humorous advice about how the heck do you get an entire book down on paper, make it good, and then get it out the door.
It is such a hard thing because I teach sometimes, and those young students who haven't yet conquered the novel are so terrified by it. And when I was flipping through your book, I was like, oh, this is it. This is what they need. They need a way to sort of mentally frame it. Now let's go back. Okay, because now I already have 800 questions. But my first one is, I'm gonna go with my first one is because like I said, I have 50,000. Why 7 drafts? I got a sense by flipping through, right? I'm gonna ask you specifically about the first one, which is the vomit draft. Okay, the story, the character, the technical, the copy. I get sort of the name of all those drafts. But how did you settle on 7 versus 10 versus when you look through your book, it's like every draft has 800 things under it. So it could have been 50,000 drafts. How did you settle on 7?
Because 17 would have been depressing and discouraging. No, I came up with 7 a number of years ago. I was actually teaching with a writing group in India, and I was sitting in a coffee shop in Bombay, and they were live streaming me to their writing group. And at the very end, they said, so, you know, you've said to us, it takes more drafts than you think to write a book. I mean, I think we've all done, you know, draft 36, final, doc. And I said, well, you want a draft where you just get it down on paper. You want a draft where you make sure the story makes sense. Once the story makes sense, you can make sure that all of the characters make sense and are how you want them to be. Then you're going to clean up all your sentences and paragraphs and chapters just on a technical level. Give it a good once over yourself before you send it out so that it will be pleasant to read for your feedback people. Get feedback from some people who are your peers. Get feedback from some people better than you. And that's 7. Now, many of those drafts are more than 1 draft apiece. You know, you might write 3 story drafts as you negotiate and you get feedback and you discover, oh, the book doesn't end there. The book needs 3 more chapters before it can end. You know, you may have 3 or 4 technical drafts as you go, okay, I let this book rest for 3 months and I'm a better writer now. I took a workshop, I learned some stuff. I can go back and make this 15% better right now. And so I think that by calling it 7, though, it's kind of 7 categories of draft.
Well, and 7 does, to your earlier point, my husband always laughs. It's funny that you said 17. My husband always laughs that I have a 17-point rewrite plan when I get to a certain place, right? Like I have that thing. But 7 feels digestible. Like it doesn't, and look, writing a novel is extraordinarily daunting. It is really long. Like writing a book, it's really, 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 really long, and people don't get how long it takes.
And we're not telling people this to make them discouraged or to make them not want to write a book. We're saying when you get to draft 6 and you thought the book was going to be done 3 drafts ago, it's not just you. That's how long writing a book takes.
Right. And people, I think people do need that encouragement. I think too many people get discouraged when like the first draft isn't brilliant. And I'm like, the first one is just puking.
Or they are far too excited about the first draft. Like definitely get excited about your first draft because you're going to need that excitement to sustain you. But I got to tell you, the deadly words are when someone who has written a book for the very first time, and I'm going to say this is usually an older person, often a dude, often a white dude who has had many things in their life come easily to them. They are usually very successful in whatever their regular career is. So they decided they'd write a book and they send it to me and they say, all it needs is a quick proofread. And that is the magic phrase that tells me this is your first draft of your first book. You can't tell the difference between what's on your page and the books that are on your shelf. Because even for experienced writers, our brains fill in stuff that is not on the page. And anyone who asks for a quick proofread always needs a complete rewrite from the ground up.
Okay, so what you are, I love you because you light up when you talk about this stuff. Like you may not know how much you light up and how much you're like, this is the greatest stuff ever. What got you so interested? You're also a writer of your own. I mean, you wrote this book. You also write your own stuff.
I do.
But what got you so invested? Do you know what makes you so passionate about editing other people's stories?
Yeah. So I was still a full-time circus performer. I mean, I've written my whole life, but my job was circus performer. And I did that for about 20 years. And while I was performing around the world, I was also still doing some writing in, kind of a semi-serious way. And then a friend of mine from high school started a writing contest on LiveJournal. And LiveJournal is like an old school blogging site. It's owned by the Russians now. It's really weird, but it wasn't at the time. And the deal was he set up this contest where each week there was a prompt and everybody had to write something for the prompt. You could write anything you wanted. You could write a poem, you could sing a song, you could write a journal entry, you could write a short story, you could write an essay. And then everybody voted. And the low people on the totem pole, went home as it was. And then the next week we got another prompt. And I said, sure, I'll participate. This will be fun. Well, there were 365 people in it. And I decided that not only did I want to play, I wanted to win. And so every single week, the contest ended up lasting 10 and a half months. Every single week, I commented on every single person's post, because you want them to like you enough to vote for you by showing that you have engaged with their work. And so over the first 4 months of this contest, I started to learn how to make a comment that encourages the writer and recognizes what they've done well, while also giving them something genuinely helpful in a way that they can receive the feedback. And there were many people at different stages of their writing learning in this contest. And you learn a lot more from reading not great writing than you learn from great writing, because it's so much easier to identify the problem when the writing is not great. And then you can apply that to your own work. And 10 and a half months later, we had whittled down gradually. Near the end of the contest, we were writing, I think I wrote 17 entries in 2.5 weeks. And I was literally sitting in the coffee shop that had a view of the street corner that I was about to perform on for a festival. And I was typing and going, okay, they're still in their finale. I can get this story done. I know I can get this. And then I would go out and do a trapeze act. And it was phenomenal on a number of ways. Number one, it made me know that I'm an editor. It made me know that I could identify what problems people had and that they pretty much all have the same problems. Number two, it made me become very active about sharing my writing with other people in a way that I had never previously shared my work with other people. Because if you wanted to win, you had to get votes. And there weren't enough votes inside the contest pool to be able to win. So I had to send stuff out to my friends. And I developed this email list of 150 people, and I would send to 20 different people each week because that was enough votes to get me in without wearing out my welcome on any of my friends. But at the end of this contest, which I did end up winning, thanks, I had a list of 150 people who wanted to read what I was writing. And it made me get very serious about, okay, I'd really like to do this, and I'd like to do it for real, and I'd like to make something good.
What did you learn about writing from circus performing? Because on the surface, it seems like they're two different things, but I start thinking about it and I start going, no, I bet you learned some like story stuff or some, I bet you learned some stuff from being a circus performer for 20 years.
And so I primarily did not perform in a tent. I sometimes performed in theaters, and I mostly performed on the street, whether that was part of a festival where, like in Canada and in Europe, a downtown, like the city organization, will shut down the entire downtown, make it pedestrian streets, and put out street performers. And we do what's called a circle show, which means there's a big circle of anywhere from 100 to 500 people standing and watching your show in the middle. And we would put up a big hot pink tripod and do aerial fabric, aerial hoop, trapeze. And then on the ground, we were also doing acrobatics, fire eating, and comedy. And what you learn real fast about street performing is that the tricks are an excuse for the audience to spend time with you. So, hey, I'm going to eat some fire and I'm waving the torch. Come on over and see me eat some fire. Well, eating fire is a 3-second trick. You put the fire in your mouth, you close your mouth around the fire, and the fire goes out most of the time before it burns you. The challenge is taking that 3-second trick and building a 15-minute routine with comedy and audience participation. And you can't just pull somebody up on stage from the audience and make fun of them, because they are the representative of the audience. You have to honor them. You have to treat them like a hero. And so doing this show over and over again, and I did it with a bunch of different people. I think I probably had 20 different people who cycled through the company. We usually worked in teams of 3. And you get to tell the same joke 100 times in a row. So, okay, we had 8 shows this week. We told the same joke 8 times, and it didn't get a laugh in show 1. So we changed the wording in show 2 and it got a better laugh. And then we emphasized a different word in show 3, and then it got a really good laugh. And then we changed a little bit more in show 4, and that didn't work so well. So we went back to the way we did it in show 3 for show 5. And so after 20 years of doing the same show, and I've done the math, I did the same show about 8,000 times. You really get a sense for how to make a sentence that is funny and concise and that engages the audience. And you really get a sense as well of how do you interest people? How do you get them excited in what it is that you're about to do? And how do you bond with them as a human and go, hey, we're going to have a great experience and we're going to have it all together? Because part of our job as writers that I think never gets taught by anyone is that it's not just our job to engage the reader or to entertain them. It is also our job to share a common humanity with them for the span of time it takes them to read our book.
Yeah, I love the idea that it's the trick that's getting the audience to spend time with you, because that's the plot to me. That's like the page turning plot. That's the trick that's making the reader stay with you as you're turning. It doesn't last very long, but that's so that they will spend time in this world and with these people and getting these little insights and getting this moment, but you got to have the plot. You got to have the trick that moves it along.
And it can even be simpler than the plot. Like I would pick up your book about Raphael because I freaking love the Renaissance. I think the Renaissance is amazing. Raphael, sign me up, you know? And then we're going to share some time together. You know, you've sucked me in with the trick, and now we're going to spend some intimate time together, learning and discovering something cool together.
You said earlier in this conversation that everybody makes very similar mistakes, or you keep seeing the same mistakes over and over again. You don't have to share all of your secrets here with us today, but since I do have a lot of writers who watch the show to get better at their craft, what are some of the common mistakes that you see people making?
Well, I'll tell you a macro one and I'll tell you a micro one. So the macro one is very often when people are on their first, second, or third draft, where they're still focused on the story, the book starts about 50 pages sooner than it needs to be. And if you can go to page 50 and start there, very often that's where you need to be. I was working with someone who was writing a really interesting YA science fiction novel. And the first 50 pages was the girl wakes up and she goes to her house and she's late for school and she gets on her cool skateboard hoverboard and she gets to school and she gets into the class and she just makes it in by the skin of her teeth and, you know, gets like somebody opens a window for her and she jumps in on this cool skateboard hoverboard. And it's a really great scene. It's not bad writing at all. All we really need to know is that she can ride the cool skateboard hoverboard, because that's the part that's going to be relevant later in the book. And so we can actually start at page 50 when she's riding the cool skateboard hoverboard home from school and the aliens come to pick her up, because that's where the story actually starts. And something that each writer can do to find out, are you starting too early? Take pages 50 to 70 of your own book. So discard pages 1 through 50, take pages 50 to 70 and send them to a new reader who hasn't read the book before and ideally doesn't even know the story. And you ask that person, make a list. Make me a list of everything you know. So like, for example, page 50, I know she can ride the cool skateboard hoverboard. I know the trees look like this. I know she lives in this town that she's driving by right now. I know that the houses are made of adobe. I know that she's really into stars because she keeps looking up at these stars she can see in the daytime. All of those things that your reader knows, take them out of the first 50 pages. Because you don't need to establish them in the first 50 pages if they're there in page 50 and someone can already get them. And we need to write those first 50 pages because it's how we get into the story and get all that background information that we need so that we can then take that lump and pull out just the bits that we need to season the rest of the book as we go forward. You can also have the person make a list of what were you confused by? What do you wish you knew? And then you either keep those things from the first 50 pages or you weave them back in a little bit later. So that's my big macro tip, pages 50 to 70. The micro tip I would say that I see for just about everybody is filtering. And that's where the narrator or the character is saying, I felt this, I saw this, I heard this, I could see this, I could smell that. And that filtering language puts up a tiny little barrier between the character and the reader. The reader is reminded, you're not in this book. This is not happening to you. You are watching a character have these things happen to them. They are separate from you. And by removing that filtering, and it can be as simple as, you know, instead of Lizette felt cold, wet seaweed on her arm, cold, wet seaweed draped Lizette's arm. Because then we're just that tiny fraction closer to looking through the character's eyes, feeling what the character is feeling, experiencing what the character is experiencing.
So you're also a playwright.
Yes.
I don't know why it's such a prose writing thing that people think they need big, long chapters of setup. I'm like, what? Nobody in the movies or in the plays do that. You get right into action.
And the difference is because playwrights work with actors, and actors will walk onto stage in rehearsal and say, I don't know why I'm in this scene. Why am I in this scene? And then you have 24 hours to fix that before the next rehearsal, or the same actor will stop at the same place and say, I still don't know why I'm in this scene, or why do I have all this exposition? Does the audience really need to know this? And it's almost like having your own little cadre of editors every single night.
Well, and because actors walk on stage with all of this character all over them that doesn't show up on the page, right? So they walk in with all of this life and all of this stuff and all of these choices that suddenly you're like, oh, I didn't need that. The actor brought it all on with one sigh, like it was all done.
Yeah.
But
And
those writers really fall into that trap.
And we have to look for those single gestures or those single moments that make a whole lot of abstract backstory into something concrete. Like Bertolt Brecht, Mother Courage and Her Children, classic play, you know, giant of the world theater. Mother Courage is escaping war, and she's got a couple of kids with her, and one of them gets kidnapped, and she comes to the kidnappers and she says, please, please give me back my beloved child. And they say, sure, it'll be 5 cents. And she looks in her pocket and she's got 5 cents. She puts 2 of them back in her pocket and she says, I've got 3, please give me my child. And like that gesture that shows how cheap she is, even when her child's life is at stake. I don't need to know that she grew up eating cold potatoes. I don't need to know that there wasn't enough coal for the fire. All I need to know is she is so cheap that she's got 5 cents, but she's going to get her kid for 3 if she can.
Do you have this brain that sounds like it's constantly running about these things?
It's hard to sleep.
Hard to sleep. But also, how do you, as an editor, put that aside to be able to write your first draft, to be able to not have that constant, because I think that's part of the problem of sitting down with that. You call it a vomit draft. I always call it puking on a page, which my husband hates. He hates it that I call it that, but that's what I call it.
Jenny Elder Moak has a really good way to describe it. She's the author of a book called Hood, that's a new retelling of the Robin Hood story. Jenny Elder Moak describes it as the grocery draft. You've gone to the grocery store, you have a pile of ingredients that you have assembled on your counter. That's your grocery draft. Now in your next draft, you're going to decide what to cook. Yes.
Yeah, that's it, right? That's a much nicer way to say it than vomiting or puking on a page, but whatever.
But vomit sticks in the head.
Right. How do you switch that hat for yourself? Because I think knowing how you do it might help some people at home who struggle with that. Putting aside that internal, don't do that yet. How do you do it? How do you separate those two?
There's a couple of different things. One is that I do a lot of thinking before I start writing. So I often have a clear idea of not necessarily what the plot is going to be, but who the characters are. And then they can talk to me, which sounds ridiculous, and tell me where they're going and what they're doing. Hilary Mantel, who wrote Wolf Hall, said a wonderful thing. She was working on a book about a giant. And she said, you know, in her head, she puts a chair in a room and invites the character to come in and sit in the chair and talk to her. And she said the giant came in and he tested the chair for his weight before sitting down. And that told her everything she needed to know. And so when I start writing, I very often don't know where I'm going or where the story is going to end. I write the beginning, I write the ending, I write some chunks of the middle, and then I make an outline and fill everything in around it. And while I'm doing that, I don't edit anybody's book that's in the same genre as I'm writing in. Like if I'm working on young adult, I don't edit young adult. If I'm working on a play, I don't edit a play, because that way I don't have my editor hat on. It also helps that I work with other people around me. I very often am writing with a writing buddy where we'll sit down, we'll say, okay, this is what I'm going to get done. We will work for like an hour or 90 minutes, and then we'll stop, take a break, and then either write for another 90 minutes or, you know, not. With particular writing buddies, we'll write and then we'll read our material to each other, you know, but it's a close little relationship. But that helps me a lot because it helps me see what's engaging their attention, and that helps me move forward. I think I'm not really answering your question, which is how do you write without the editor brain on? And I've heard a lot of tips and tricks about how to do that, but that's not been my problem. My problem is ass in chair. I will dick around on the internet for 5 or 6 hours before I will sit down and write that first word. Once I start, I can generate about 1,000 words in an hour. And to finish this book, 7 drafts, I checked into a hotel on 2 separate occasions and did 40,000 words each time. You know, like a 5-day stretch where I was doing like 40,000 words over the 5 days.
As a historical novelist, that makes my head hurt.
Yeah, because I think it would be different too for fiction. Like that was a nonfiction book, so it was different. But even with fiction, after I've like noodled through a draft for a really long time, I usually then try to take a specific time and go, okay, I'm going to take this 5 days and I'm just going to work on this book. And that's going to be the only thing in my head. But yeah, my problem is not editing as I write. My problem is starting.
I think I scared students I had a few months ago because they asked me like how many, like, was this your first book to write? And I was like, my first book to write? No, I have 7 in a filing cabinet that will never see the light of day, ever. Thank goodness that I didn't try to publish them, or there was no access to that when I started, like couldn't have. How many, most people that you edit, most people who's like editing you work with, are they late in that process where they've written lots of books? Are people publishing the first thing they put out? What are you seeing?
You know, I think it is an arrogance unique to writing among all the arts, where we think our first work is worthy. Painters sketch, they throw away pages and pages and pages before they ever make something good. You know, the whole point of oil painting is that you can keep going over it and changing it and making it different. Dancers go to class every single day and learn hundreds of combinations that they will never do on a stage. Actors go into rooms and rehearse scenes that the only point is to practice rehearsing a scene. And in writing, we don't really have a tradition of practice because our work is private. So when our mentors, when our workshop leaders, when our teachers, when the writers we admire, they say, oh yeah, I have books in a drawer, or oh yeah, I have shitty first drafts. It's like them telling us to believe in Santa Claus because we don't see it. You know, I can watch a dance class and see people be better than other people. I can watch an art class and see people be better than other people. But it is very rare that a student is at a place in their development where they can judge, am I better or worse than the other people in this class? And we don't see, oh, it took them 18 tries to write that really great sentence. You know, it took that dancer 18 jumps to get the third turnaround, but we didn't get to watch it in the writing. And so a lot of writers don't understand that, yeah, we really do have a lot of stuff in drawers it was good. We're glad we wrote it, but it wasn't good enough.
Just give me like 1 or 2 of your favorite tips that are in that book. Because really, when I flipped through it, I was like, oh, this is going to help so many people.
Yeah.
So what are a couple of your favorite, just off the top of your head? What are your couple of your absolute favorite tips?
Off the top of my head? Meet other writers. Meet other writers. I know that's not so like writing focused, but meet other writers. Even if they're not writing the same thing as you, it's really valuable to have a community where you may not even share your work, but you're sharing the experience of writing and submitting. And we're very lucky that a lot of that can happen electronically now. I host a bi-weekly platform chat for authors called the Writer's Bridge, where there's like a short breakout time near the end and people meet other writers. I think also plan that it's going to take longer than you expect to finish your book. And that doesn't make it bad. And that doesn't make you a bad writer. It takes all of us longer than we think to finish the book. And then I would also say, watch for the phrases that you normally use and put those in your book when you are writing characters or when you are writing your memoir, because very often we fall prey to special writer voice, you know, and I perambulated down the street to enjoy libations with my compatriots instead of, yeah, we went to the bar and had a drink. And trust your own voice on the page. Your voice is good. Your voice is worthy. And as you practice your voice, it will develop even more. You don't have to use fancy words. You don't have to use big words. You don't have to use wacky sentence constructions. Just tell us the story. And then in the next draft, tell it a little better.
Story time with Stephanie Storey. Story time virtually. We've got time and plenty of stories, talking stories in a novel way. Story time with Stephanie Storey.